The basement smelled like motor oil and betrayal. I sat hunched over my workbench, surrounded by the familiar chaos of half-finished projects and broken appliances that I actually knew how to fix, unlike my marriage, apparently. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across the stack of credit card statements I'd been studying for the past hour. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name's Eli Granger, and I'm a mechanical engineer who spent the last 15 years believing that problems have solutions if you just apply the right amount of logic and elbow grease. Tonight, I was discovering that some problems require a different kind of tool entirely. Eli, honey, have you seen my good suitcase? Lila's voice drifted down from upstairs, sweet as antifreeze and twice as toxic. Check the closet, I called back, not looking up from the visa statement. There it was, line item number 47. Grandview Resort and Spa Couples Package, $2,147, booked 3 weeks ago. For 2 people, for 14 nights. The same 14 nights she'd told me she'd be at a boring HR conference in Cleveland with her work husband, Brandon Harker. I heard her heels clicking across the kitchen floor above my head, each step like a countdown timer ticking towards something inevitable. Lila had always been ambitious. It's what attracted me to her when we met at that company mixer 8 years ago. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone believe she belonged there, even when she didn't. Especially when she didn't. Found it, she chirped from upstairs. I folded the statement and slipped it into my back pocket, right next to the printed email confirmations I'd found on her laptop yesterday. Amazing how people forget to log out of their accounts when they're rushing around, planning their romantic getaways. The stairs creaked as I climbed up from my sanctuary of honest work and broken things that could actually be repaired. Lila stood in our bedroom, methodically folding clothes into her expensive leather suitcase, the one I'd bought her for our 5th anniversary, back when I still believed in things like anniversaries. She looked good. She always looked good. Mid-30s, blonde hair that cost more per month than my truck payment, and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos or lies to husbands. Tonight, she wore a black dress that hugged her curves just right, the kind of outfit you pack when you want to impress someone. Excited about Cleveland? I asked, leaning against the door frame. She didn't look up from her packing. Oh, you know how these HR conferences are. Lots of seminars about workplace diversity and harassment policies. Riveting stuff. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brandon going too? I kept my voice casual, like I was asking about the weather. The whole sales team is required to attend. Company policy. She held up 2 different bikinis, studying them with the intensity of a surgeon choosing scalpels. Which one do you think? For Cleveland? In March? I raised an eyebrow. Unless they've moved Lake Erie to the Caribbean, I'd go with the parka. She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. The hotel has an indoor pool, silly. Might as well take advantage of the amenities if the company's paying for it. Except, the company wasn't paying for it. I'd already called her office, pretending to be from the travel agency confirming details. Her assistant, sweet little Jenny Morrison, had been very helpful. Oh no, she'd said. Lila's taking personal time. 2 whole weeks. She said she needed to recharge her batteries. Don't forget your hepatitis B vaccination card, I said, watching her face in the mirror. You never know what's going around at these conferences. For just a second, maybe half a second, her hands stopped moving. Then she resumed folding, but I caught the slight tremor in her fingers. That's silly, Eli. It's Cleveland, not Cambodia. Better safe than sorry. Remember what happened to Brandon last month? Out sick for a week with some kind of infection. This time she did look at me, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Brandon's fine now, she said. Just a stomach bug. I nodded sagely. Funny how those things spread, especially when people share close quarters. She zipped the suitcase shut with more force than necessary. I should get going. Early flight tomorrow. Tonight? I checked my watch. It's already past 10. Brandon's picking me up. We're staying at the airport hotel tonight to make the morning flight easier. She hefted the suitcase off the bed, and I noticed she was stronger than she used to be. All those new gym sessions, no doubt. Getting in shape for someone. I followed her downstairs, watching as she gathered her purse, her laptop bag, and the small overnight case she'd packed earlier. Everything neat and organized, like a military operation. How long did you say this conference was? I asked. Just a week. She kissed my cheek, and her perfume, a new scent I didn't recognize, made my nose itch. I'll call you when I land. Thought you said 14 days on the calendar. She froze with her hand on the doorknob. Did I? No, just 7 days. You must have misread it. But I hadn't misread anything. The calendar upstairs clearly showed 2 weeks blocked out, written in her careful handwriting. Cleveland Conference. Do not disturb. Car lights swept across our front window, and Brandon's silver BMW pulled into the driveway. He didn't get out, didn't even turn off the engine, just sat there like a getaway driver waiting for his partner to finish robbing the bank. That's my ride, Lila said, suddenly in a hurry. She grabbed her bags and headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Eli? If anyone calls looking for me, just tell them I'm unavailable. Complete radio silence for the next 2 weeks. I really need to focus on this conference. 2 weeks. She'd slipped up again. Sure thing, honey. Have fun learning about harassment policies. She winced at that, actually winced, and then she was gone. I watched through the window as Brandon got out to help her with the luggage. Even from a distance, I could see his cocky grin, the way he touched her lower back as he guided her to the passenger seat, the way she leaned into him. They drove off into the night, leaving me alone in the house we'd bought together, surrounded by the life we'd built together, holding the evidence of how thoroughly she'd decided to tear it all down. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Frankie Cruz's number. Frankie and I went way back. High school, then community college. Then he'd gone into the Army while I'd stayed home and learned how to fix things. Now he ran a private security company, which was a fancy way of saying he helped people find things they'd lost. Sometimes those things were objects. Sometimes they were people. Sometimes they were the truth. I typed, "Need a favor? You still know your way around a GPS tracker?" The response came back almost immediately. "You buying drinks or bail?" I smiled for the first time all evening. Both, probably. Say no more. Meet me at Murphy's tomorrow night. Bring cash and a good explanation. I set the phone down and looked around the empty house. 14 days. That's how long she thought she had to play house with Brandon Harker to live out whatever fantasy she'd constructed in her head about their great romance. She was wrong about a lot of things, but she was especially wrong about the timeline. I had 14 days, too. 14 days to show her that some problems don't get solved with sweet words and careful planning. Some problems require a more mechanical approach. Murphy's Tavern squatted on the corner of 5th and Industrial like a toad that had given up on becoming a prince. The neon sign flickered between Murph's Ta Urn and Complete Darkness, which pretty much summed up the clientele's prospects in life. It was the kind of place where construction workers drank away their back pain and office drones came to forget they'd ever had dreams. Perfect for the conversation I needed to have. Frankie was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and flirting with Diane, the bartender who'd been 45 years old for the past decade. He looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for ex-military security consultant. Buzz cut going gray at the temples, shoulders that could carry a piano, and eyes that missed nothing. Well, he said as I slid into the booth across from him. If it isn't the happily married man. How's domestic bliss treating you, Eli? About as well as your last relationship with that redhead from Portland. Ouch. That bad? He signaled Diane for another round. So what's this about GPS trackers? Finally decided to find out where Lila goes during those long lunch meetings? I pulled out the credit card statements and spread them across the sticky table like evidence in a murder trial. She's in Cleveland. At least, that's what she told me. Frankie studied the papers, his expression growing more serious with each line item. Grandview Resort. I know that place. It's about 3 hours north of here, up in the mountains. Very romantic, very expensive, very much not Cleveland. That's what I figured. And this Brandon character, he's the work husband? Sales manager at her company, 34 years old, drives a BMW, thinks he's God's gift to womankind. The kind of guy who wears cologne to the gym and calls women sweetheart in business meetings. Frankie nodded knowingly. I've met the type. Usually found them face down in the mud during training exercises, crying for their mothers. He leaned back in the booth. So what are you thinking? Surveillance? Photos? Full investigation package? I'm thinking I want to know exactly where they go, what they do, and who they tell about it. I took a long pull of my beer, and I want them to know that I know, without them knowing that I know they know. That's either very clever or very stupid, sometimes both. Frankie grinned. I like it. When do we start? Tonight. Brandon's car is parked at the airport hotel. Tomorrow they fly out to their little love nest, but the car stays here for 2 weeks. Perfect. Nothing says welcome home like finding out your transportation has been compromised. Frankie pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. I've got just the thing. Military-grade GPS tracker, battery life of 6 months, accurate to within 3 feet, and completely undetectable unless you know exactly what to look for. We finished our beers and drove to the airport in Frankie's pickup truck, which looked like it had survived several wars and maybe a natural disaster or two. The hotel parking lot was exactly what you'd expect. Poorly lit, minimally secured, and full of travelers who were either too tired or too distracted to pay attention to their surroundings. Brandon's BMW sat in the back row, gleaming silver under the weak streetlight. Even parked, it looked arrogant. Nice ride, Frankie muttered, pulling on latex gloves. Probably costs more than I make in 6 months. Lila always said she was attracted to success. I kept watch while Frankie worked. Guess I should have bought a flashier car instead of paying off the mortgage. Success is relative. I'd rather have a man who keeps his promises than one who keeps a BMW. He slid under the car with practiced ease. Besides, this thing's going to be a real pain in the ass to maintain once I'm done with it. What do you mean? Let's just say the GPS tracker isn't the only surprise I'm installing. His voice was muffled by the undercarriage. Amazing how many things can go wrong with a car when the owner isn't paying attention. A security guard rounded the corner, flashlight sweeping lazily across the parking lot. I tensed, but Frankie just kept working, calm as a surgeon. "Evening, officer," I called out, walking toward the guard with my hands visible. "My buddy's checking his oil. Car's been making funny noises all day." The guard was maybe 22, bored out of his skull, and probably making minimum wage. Little late for car maintenance, isn't it? You know how it is. Work all day, fix cars all night. The glamorous life of a mechanic. I gestured toward Frankie's legs sticking out from under the BMW. Better safe than sorry, right? The guard nodded and moved on, already losing interest. By the time he was out of sight, Frankie had finished his work and was wiping his hands on a rag. "All done," he said. "Your boy Brandon is going to have a very interesting trip home." We drove back to Murphy's for a celebratory drink, and I filled Frankie in on the rest of my discoveries. The secret emails, the fake conference story, the way Lila had been working late more and more often over the past few months. "Classic pattern," Frankie said. "I see it all the time in my line of work. The cheating spouse always thinks they're the first person to come up with these brilliant deception strategies, They never realize how predictable they are. What's the usual outcome? Depends on the spouse. Some people just want proof for the divorce lawyer. Others want revenge. He studied my face. What do you want, Eli? I thought about that question as I drove home to my empty house. What did I want? The old me would have wanted reconciliation, counseling, a chance to work things out. The old me still believed that people were fundamentally good, that mistakes could be forgiven, that love conquered all. But the old me hadn't seen the look on Lila's face when she kissed Brandon goodbye in the driveway. The old me hadn't read the emails where she called me boring and predictable and completely clueless. The old me was dead. He died sometime between finding the credit card statements and watching my wife drive away with another man. The new me wanted something different entirely. I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences. I wanted them to learn that betrayal cuts both ways. I wanted them to discover that the boring, predictable, completely clueless husband they'd dismissed so easily was actually the most dangerous kind of enemy, the kind with nothing left to lose. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Paula Morse, my old college friend who now ran the emergency room at Mercy General. We'd stayed in touch over the years, mostly through social media and the occasional beer when our schedules aligned. Heard through the grapevine that Brandon Harker's been spreading more than just good cheer around town. Thought you should know, hepatitis B is a real illness to treat. Hope Lila's keeping up with her vaccinations. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Hepatitis B? Are you sure? Positive. Came through my ER last month, scared out of his mind. Wanted the whole workup, confidential testing, the works. Results came back positive for exposure. He's probably infectious right about now. My hands started shaking, not from fear, from something much more dangerous. The universe, it seemed, had just handed me the perfect weapon. I called Paula immediately. Eli, good to hear from you. How's married life treating you? That's actually why I'm calling. Hypothetically speaking, if someone was exposed to hepatitis B, how long would it take for symptoms to show up? Hypothetically, anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months. Why? And if someone was intimate with an infected person during that window? There was a pause. Eli, is everything okay? Is Lila? She's fine. Probably. I hope. But she's been traveling with Brandon for work, and if what you're telling me is true... Oh, shit. Paula's professional demeanor cracked. Eli, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were... I heard rumors, but I thought they were just rumors. What kind of rumors? Office gossip, mostly. People saying they were awfully cozy at the company Christmas party. But I figured it was just talk. Lila always seemed so devoted to you. Devoted. Right. Like a tick is devoted to a dog. Paula, I need a favor. A big one. Name it. I need you to call Lila tomorrow and tell her she needs to come in for testing. Make it sound urgent but not panicked. Tell her there's been an exposure at Brandon's office and anyone who's had close contact with him needs to be screened immediately. That's actually good medical advice. If she's been exposed, she needs to know as soon as possible. And Paula? When she comes in for the test, I need you to ask her some very specific questions about her recent travel history and intimate contacts. For medical reasons, of course. Of course. I could hear the smile in her voice. You know, Eli, I always thought you were too good for her. Yeah, well, live and learn. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the calendar on the refrigerator. Lila had marked off the next 14 days with a red pen, like a countdown to freedom. Her handwriting was neat and precise, just like everything else about her carefully constructed deception. But now I had a countdown of my own. 14 days to dismantle her perfect little fantasy. 14 days to show her and Brandon that some games have consequences they never saw coming. I picked up a black pen and started making my own marks on the calendar. Day 1, GPS tracker installed. Day 2, medical scare initiated. 13 more days to go. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m. on day 3, jarring me awake from the first decent sleep I'd had since Lila left. I knew it was her before I even looked at the caller ID. She had a particular way of letting the phone ring just long enough to make sure she'd ruined your entire morning. Eli? Her voice was tight, strained. I need to ask you something. Good morning to you too, sweetheart. How's Cleveland treating you? Fine. Great. Listen, did anyone call the house looking for me? Anyone from work or a doctor's office? I smiled into the phone. Paula worked fast. Funny you should ask. Dr. Morse called yesterday afternoon. Something about a health screening. She said it was urgent and asked me to have you call her back immediately. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Lila? You still there? What kind of health screening? Her voice was barely a whisper. She didn't say. Just that there'd been some kind of exposure at your office and anyone who'd had close contact with certain employees needed to come in for testing. I paused for effect. She specifically mentioned Brandon Harker. I heard her sharp intake of breath, followed by what sounded like muffled sobbing. Lila, are you okay? I have to go. The line went dead. I set the phone down and made myself a cup of coffee, humming softly. It was going to be a beautiful day. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Frankie. Your boy Brandon just peeled out of the resort parking lot like his ass was on fire. GPS shows him heading south at about 90 miles per hour. Want me to follow? No need, I typed back. They're coming home early. Let them sweat. The next few hours passed in a pleasant haze of anticipation. I cleaned the house, did some laundry, and even picked up flowers from the grocery store. Yellow roses, Lila's favorite. The kind of gesture a loving, clueless husband would make for his wife's early return from a business trip. They pulled into the driveway at 3:15 p.m., Brandon's BMW looking significantly less pristine than when they'd left. The GPS tracker was working perfectly, sending location updates to my phone every 30 seconds. I'd watched their entire panicked journey home, the sudden departure from the resort, the speeding tickets, 3 of them, the frantic stop at a roadside pharmacy. Lila stumbled out of the car, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 3 days. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her hands were shaking as she pulled her suitcase from the trunk. Brandon didn't even get out to help her. He just sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead with the expression of a man who'd just watched his entire world collapse. Honey, I called from the front porch, waving cheerfully. You're home early. How was the conference? She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Brandon, I continued, walking toward the car with my biggest smile. Good to see you. Hope you're feeling better. Heard you had some kind of bug last month. His face went white. Actually white, like someone had drained all the blood out of his head. Eli, Lila said, her voice cracking. We need to talk. Of course we do. Come on inside. I'll make some tea. Brandon finally found his voice. I should get going. Early meeting tomorrow. Nonsense, I said, opening his car door. Come in for a few minutes, I insist. He looked like he wanted to refuse, but Lila was already walking toward the house, and leaving would have looked suspicious, or more suspicious than it already did. I ushered them into the living room, where the yellow roses sat in a crystal vase on the coffee table. Lila stared at them like they were evidence of her guilt. So, I said, settling into my favorite armchair. Tell me all about Cleveland. Did you learn a lot about harassment policies? Brandon shifted uncomfortably on the couch. It was very educational. I'll bet. Lila, you look tired. Rough flight? She was staring at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around and around her finger. Eli, Dr. Morse called me this morning. Oh, good. You got the message. What did she say? She said... Lila's voice broke. She said there might have been an exposure to hepatitis B, and that anyone who'd had close contact with Brandon needed to be tested immediately. I turned to Brandon with what I hoped looked like genuine concern. Hepatitis B? That sounds serious. When were you diagnosed? I haven't been. He was sweating now, actual drops of perspiration beading on his forehead. It's probably nothing. False alarm. But Dr. Morse seemed to think it was urgent, Lila said, her voice rising. She wants me to come in tomorrow morning for a full panel. Blood work, everything. Well, that's good, I said reasonably. Better safe than sorry, right? I'm sure it's just a precaution. Brandon stood up abruptly. I really do need to go. Lila, I'll call you later. Actually, Brandon, I said, not moving from my chair, before you go, I wanted to ask you something, man to man. He froze halfway to the door. I've been doing some thinking while Lila was away, and I realized I don't really know much about your personal life. Are you seeing anyone? Dating? In a relationship? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Lila made a small, strangled sound. I'm between relationships right now, Brandon managed. That's too bad. Must get lonely. All those business trips, hotel rooms, conference dinners. I smiled pleasantly. Good thing you had Lila there to keep you company. Eli, Lila whispered. Please. Please what? I'm just making conversation. I stood up and walked over to Brandon, who was now backing toward the door like a cornered animal. You know, Brandon, I've always admired your confidence. The way you just take what you want, consequences be damned. It's inspiring, really. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I pulled out my phone and showed him the GPS tracking app. For instance, it's a fact that your car has been to the Grandview Resort 3 times in the past 6 months. It's a fact that my wife's credit card was used to pay for a couple's package there. And it's a fact that you're both scared out of your minds right now. Brandon's face cycled through several colors before settling on a sickly green. Now, I continued, here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my house and never come back. You're going to stay away from my wife, both professionally and personally. And you're going to get tested for every intimately transmitted disease known to medical science, because if you've given Lila anything at all, I'm going to make your life very, very complicated. You can't threaten me, Brandon said, but his voice was shaking. I'm not threatening you. I'm educating you. See, I've spent the last 3 days learning all sorts of interesting things about you. Your credit score, for instance, your mortgage payment history, that little tax problem you had 2 years ago. Amazing what you can find out about someone when you know where to look. Brandon stared at me for a long moment, then turned and practically ran for the door. His BMW roared to life and squealed out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on the asphalt. I turned back to Lila, who was still sitting on the couch, crying silently. So, I said, sitting back down, how was your trip, really? She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. How long have you known? Does it matter? Eli, I can explain. Can you? Because I'd love to hear the explanation for this. I pulled out the printed emails and credit card statements and spread them across the coffee table. Go ahead. Explain to me how a conference in Cleveland turned into a romantic getaway in the mountains. Explain how your work husband became your actual husband. Explain how the woman I've loved for 8 years decided that our marriage was worth less than a 2-week vacation with a man who apparently has hepatitis B. She stared at the evidence of her betrayal, her face crumpling. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered. How was it supposed to happen? I don't know. I was going to tell you, eventually, after I figured out what I wanted. And what do you want, Lila? She was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was so soft I had to strain to hear it. I want to feel alive again. I want to feel like I matter, like I'm more than just someone's wife and someone's employee and someone's daughter. I want to feel beautiful and desired and free. And you can't feel those things with me. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. No, I can't. I nodded slowly. Well then, I guess we know where we stand. What are you going to do? I looked at her sitting there on our couch, surrounded by the wreckage of our life together, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. I'm going to make sure you get exactly what you want, Lila. You want to feel alive? You want excitement? You want to be free? She nodded hesitantly. Then buckle up, sweetheart, because your new life starts tomorrow. The medical clinic's waiting room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat in my truck across the street, watching through binoculars as Lila paced back and forth in front of the reception desk, her phone pressed to her ear. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept running her free hand through her hair. My own phone buzzed with a text from Paula. She's here. Nervous as hell. This is either going to be very therapeutic or very cruel. Why not both? I typed back. 20 minutes later, Lila emerged from the clinic looking like she'd been hit by a truck. She sat in her car for a full 5 minutes before starting the engine, and when she finally drove away, she was crying so hard I was surprised she could see the road. My phone rang immediately. Jesus Christ, Eli. Paula's voice was a mix of professional concern and personal amusement. What did you do to that poor woman? I told her the truth. How did it go? Well, the good news is she doesn't have hepatitis B. The bad news is she had to admit to having unprotected intimacy with Brandon Harker during what she initially claimed was a business trip to Cleveland. The worst news is that I'm required by law to report potential STD exposures to the health department, which means Brandon's about to get some very official phone calls. I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. And the worst news? The worst news is that your wife is now convinced she's going to die of some horrible disease, and she spent the entire appointment describing her affair in graphic detail to make sure I understood the full scope of her potential exposure. Paula paused. Eli, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go down this road? Because once this kind of thing gets out, it's already out, Paula. The only question is whether it spreads naturally or gets a little help. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this better than most men would. The day is young. After I hung up, I drove to Brandon's apartment complex, a trendy development downtown where young professionals went to pretend they were more successful than they actually were. His BMW was in its assigned spot, and I could see lights on in his third-floor window. I parked across the street and called Frankie. Phase 2? He asked without preamble. Phase 2. How's our friend's car running? Let's just say he's going to have an interesting morning commute. I may have accidentally loosened a few things that were supposed to stay tight. Nothing dangerous, just inconvenient. Good. Meet me at the parking garage on 5th Street in an hour. It's time for a conversation. The parking garage was perfect for what I had in mind. Multiple levels, poor lighting, and security cameras that had been broken for months. I'd done the maintenance contract for the building's HVAC system a few years back, so I knew all its blind spots and structural weaknesses. Brandon's car limped into the garage right on schedule, steam pouring from under the hood and making sounds like a dying walrus. He parked on the 3rd level and got out, cursing loudly as he surveyed the damage. Frankie had done excellent work, nothing that would cause an accident, but enough mechanical failures to make the car undrivable and expensive to repair. I waited until he'd popped the hood and was staring helplessly at the engine before I made my move. Car trouble? I asked, stepping out of the shadows. Brandon spun around, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and anger in rapid succession. What the hell are you doing here? Funny story. I was in the neighborhood and heard this terrible noise. Sounded like someone was torturing a small animal. I walked closer, keeping my hands visible and my voice conversational. Turns out it was just your engine dying a slow, painful death. You did this. It wasn't a question. Did what? I'm just a concerned citizen offering assistance to a fellow motorist. I leaned against his car, feeling the heat radiating from the ruined engine. Although I have to say, Brandon, you don't look so good. Feeling under the weather? His jaw tightened. I'm fine. Really? Because you look like a man who's just discovered that his entire life is falling apart. The affair's out, your car's dead, and pretty soon everyone's going to know exactly what kind of person you really are. You can't prove anything. I laughed, actually laughed. Brandon, I don't need to prove anything. The proof is sitting in a medical file at Mercy General. It's in the GPS logs from your car. It's in the credit card records and the hotel receipts and the text messages you thought were private. His face went white. What text messages? The ones where you called me a boring loser and said Lila deserved better. The ones where you planned your romantic getaway and laughed about how clueless I was. The ones where you described in very graphic detail what you wanted to do to my wife. Brandon took a step back. How did you get access to your private communications? Let's just say you should be more careful about public Wi-Fi networks and password security. BMW 2019 isn't exactly Fort Knox-level encryption. He was breathing hard now, his hands clenched into fists. You bastard. You've been spying on us. I've been protecting my interests. There's a difference. I pushed off from his car and took a step closer. Here's what's going to happen, Brandon. You're going to stay away from my wife. You're going to find a new job, preferably in another city. And you're going to keep your mouth shut about this conversation. Or what? Or I stop being nice about this. He actually laughed at that, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Nice? You call this nice? Brandon, if I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be hurt. This is me being reasonable. This is me giving you a chance to walk away with some dignity and tact. Fuck your dignity, he snarled and swung at me. I'd been expecting it. Cheating husbands always get violent when they're cornered. It's their last, desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that's already beyond their grasp. I ducked under his wild haymaker and grabbed his wrist, using his momentum to slam him face first against the side of his car. That was stupid, I said, twisting his arm behind his back just hard enough to make my point. But not unexpected. Men like you always resort to violence when your other tools stop working. Let me go, he gasped, his cheek pressed against the hot metal of his car. In a minute. First, I want you to understand something. I'm not some cuckolded husband you can intimidate or dismiss. I'm a man who's spent his entire career solving problems, and right now, you're a problem that needs solving. I increased the pressure on his arm, just enough to make him wince. I know where you live. I know where you work. I know your social security number, your mother's maiden name, and your bank account balances. I know about the gambling debts and the tax liens and the restraining order your ex-girlfriend filed against you 2 years ago. His struggles stopped. How could you possibly? Because I'm very good at my job, Brandon. And my job right now is making your life as complicated as possible until you disappear from mine. I released him and stepped back. He straightened up slowly, rubbing his arm and glaring at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. He got back in his car and tried to start it, but the engine just wheezed and died. After 3 attempts, he gave up and called a tow truck, shooting me venomous looks the entire time. I walked back to my own truck, feeling better than I had in days. Phase 2 was complete. Brandon was neutralized, at least temporarily, and Lila was spiraling into panic over her medical test results. But I wasn't done. Not even close. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Detective Harris with Metro PD. I'd like to speak with you about a harassment complaint that's been filed against you. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I smiled and deleted the message. Let them investigate. I hadn't broken any laws, and I had alibis for everything. More importantly, I had 14 days of carefully documented evidence showing exactly who the real criminals were in this situation. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and Brandon Harker was going to learn that some prey fights back. The Metro police station smelled like burnt coffee and institutional despair. Detective Harris looked like every cop you've ever seen in a movie. Mid-40s, tired eyes, cheap suit that had seen better decades. He gestured for me to sit across from his desk, which was covered in case files, and what appeared to be the remnants of several meals. "Mr. Granger, thanks for coming in. I understand you know why you're here." "Something about a harassment complaint," I said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair. "Though I have to say, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to have done." Harris flipped open a manila folder. "Brandon Harker claims you've been stalking him, following him, vandalizing his car, making threats. He says you assaulted him in a parking garage last night." "That's interesting. Did he mention why I might want to do any of those things?" "He says it's because you suspect him of having an affair with your wife." I nodded thoughtfully. "Well, he's half right. I don't suspect him of having an affair with my wife. I know he's having an affair with my wife. There's a difference." Harris leaned back in his chair. "You want to tell me about that?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the GPS tracking data, the credit card statements, the hotel receipts. "My wife told me she was going to a business conference in Cleveland. Instead, she spent 2 weeks at a romantic resort with Mr. Harker. They've been planning this for months, lying to me, using our joint accounts to fund their little getaway." The detective studied the evidence, his expression growing more skeptical by the minute. "This is all very interesting, Mr. Granger, but it doesn't give you the right to harass Mr. Harker." "I agree completely, which is why I haven't harassed him. He says you damaged his car. His car broke down. I offered to help. He became violent and took a swing at me. I defended myself. I pulled out my own phone and showed him a video. Parking garage has security cameras. This is from last night." Harris watched the footage, which clearly showed Brandon throwing the first punch and me restraining him without excessive force. His expression shifted from skeptical to annoyed. "Why didn't you mention the cameras before?" "You didn't ask. Besides, I figured Mr. Harker would tell you the truth about what happened. I'm disappointed to learn he didn't." The detective closed the folder and leaned forward. "Mr. Granger, I'm going to give you some free advice. Whatever's going on between you and your wife, handle it through a lawyer. Don't take matters into your own hands." "I appreciate the advice, detective, but I haven't taken anything into my own hands. I've simply been documenting the truth." "And what are you planning to do with this truth?" I smiled. "Share it with people who need to know." After leaving the police station, I drove to Lila's office building. The tech company where she worked occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, all open floor plans and motivational posters about synergy and disrupting paradigms. I'd been to enough company parties over the years to know the layout and most of the key players. Jenny Morrison, Lila's assistant, was at her desk when I walked in carrying a large bouquet of flowers and a box of expensive chocolates. "Mr. Granger," she said, brightening. "How nice to see you. Lila's not in today. She called in sick this morning." "That's okay, Jenny. I actually wanted to surprise her. Could you make sure she gets these when she comes in tomorrow?" "Of course. How thoughtful." I handed her the flowers and chocolates, along with a small envelope. "There's a card in there. Very personal, so maybe don't read it unless you have to." Jenny blushed and promised to deliver everything safely. What she didn't know was that the personal card was actually a printed copy of one of Brandon's more explicit text messages, the kind that would make it very clear to anyone who read it exactly what kind of relationship he and Lila really had. My next stop was the company break room, where I knew the office gossips gathered every afternoon for coffee and character assassination. I timed my arrival perfectly, 3:30 p.m., right when the afternoon slump hit and people were looking for entertainment. "Eli!" Jenna Walsh, Lila's best work friend, practically pounced on me. "What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" "Oh, everything's fine," I said, looking appropriately embarrassed. "I just wanted to thank everyone for covering for Lila during her medical emergency." The break room went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. "Medical emergency?" Jenna's voice was carefully neutral. The hepatitis B exposure. She had to cut her Cleveland trip short for emergency testing. Scary stuff. I shook my head sadly. She's been so worried about the results, especially since she was in such close contact with the infected person during the trip. Sasha Chen, another of Lila's office friends, nearly choked on her coffee. Hepatitis B? Who was infected? Brandon Harker. Didn't you know? I thought HR would have sent out a notice by now, warning anyone who'd had close contact with him to get tested. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Finally, Jenna cleared her throat. Eli, I think there might be some confusion. Lila wasn't in Cleveland on business. She took personal time off. 2 weeks of vacation. I blinked, looking genuinely confused. That can't be right. She specifically said it was a required HR conference. She even showed me the company memo. More silence. I could practically see the wheels turning in their heads, connecting dots they'd been trying to ignore for months. Maybe I misunderstood, I said finally. You know how it is with work stuff. Anyway, I should let you all get back to it. Thanks again for being such good friends to Lila. She's going to need all the support she can get during this difficult time. I left them there, staring at each other with dawning comprehension. By tomorrow morning, the entire office would know that Lila had lied about her trip, that she'd been exposed to hepatitis B, and that the exposure had come from Brandon Harker during what was clearly a romantic getaway. My phone rang as I was walking back to my truck. Lila's number. Eli, what the hell did you do? Good afternoon to you too, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Any symptoms yet? Don't play games with me. Jenny just called. She said you brought flowers to my office and told everyone about the hepatitis exposure. I brought flowers because I love you. I mentioned the medical situation because I was concerned about your coworker's health. Was that wrong? You know exactly what you did. What I did was tell the truth, Lila. Something you might want to try sometime. The line went quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was shaking. My boss wants to see me first thing tomorrow morning. HR is launching an investigation into my relationship with Brandon. They're talking about termination for violating the company's ethics policy. That sounds serious. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to use company resources to fund your affair. Company resources? What are you talking about? The company credit card you used for gas during your trip. The company laptop you used to book the hotel room. The company time you used to plan your romantic getaway. I paused. Did you really think no one would notice? She was crying now, ugly sobs that should have made me feel guilty. Instead, I felt nothing but a cold sense of satisfaction. Eli, please. I know I messed up, but you're destroying my entire life. I'm not destroying anything, Lila. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth about who you really are. What do you want from me? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to feel what I felt when I found out about your betrayal. I want you to lose everything that matters to you, the same way you made me lose everything that mattered to me. And then what? We just end? I looked up at her office building where I could see people gathered around windows, pointing and whispering. The gossip was already spreading, metastasizing through the company like a cancer. Then you get exactly what you wanted, Lila. You get to be free. The warehouse district at night looked like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie. Broken streetlights cast pools of sickly yellow illumination across cracked pavement, and the empty buildings loomed like tombstones against the dark sky. It was the perfect place for the final act of my carefully orchestrated drama. I'd chosen the old Hartwell Manufacturing building for tonight's performance. It had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since the company moved their operations overseas, but the power was still connected, and the acoustics were excellent. Most importantly, it was visible from the street, which meant my audience would have a clear view of everything that was about to happen. Frankie had spent the afternoon setting up the sound system, industrial-grade speakers wired to a central control panel, all hidden from view but positioned for maximum impact. He'd also installed portable lighting rigs and set up the folding chairs I'd rented from the party supply store. "You sure about this?" he asked as we did a final sound check. "Once this goes live, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure." I tested the microphone, my voice echoing through the empty space. "How's our audience looking?" Frankie peered through the grimy windows. "About 30 people so far. Word's spreading fast. Half of Lila's office is out there, plus some neighbors, a few reporters from the local paper. Even saw Detective Harris drive by twice." "Perfect. The more witnesses, the better." My phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "I'm here. Where are you?" I typed back, "Loading dock. Come alone." 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps echoing through the empty building. Lila appeared in the doorway, looking haggard and desperate. She'd lost weight over the past week, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. "Eli? What is this place?" "Our marriage counseling session," I said, stepping into the light. "Have a seat." She looked around nervously at the empty warehouse, the professional lighting setup, the speakers mounted on stands around the perimeter. "This is insane. You can't just..." "Can't what? Can't demand an honest conversation with my wife? Can't ask for the truth after 8 years of marriage?" I gestured to one of the folding chairs. "Sit down, Lila. We have an audience waiting." Her eyes widened as she noticed the crowd gathering outside the windows. "Oh my God. Eli, what have you done?" "I've arranged for a public forum, a chance for you to explain your actions to the people whose lives you've affected." I walked over to the control panel and flipped a switch. The speakers crackled to life, and I could see people outside turning toward the building. "Ladies and gentlemen," my voice boomed across the warehouse district, "thank you for coming. Tonight, we're going to have a conversation about truth, consequences, and the real cost of betrayal." Lila bolted for the door, but Frankie stepped into view, blocking her path. He didn't touch her, didn't threaten her, just stood there like an immovable object. "You're not leaving until we're finished," I said. "You owe me that much." She turned back to me, her face a mask of terror and rage. "This is kidnapping, false imprisonment. I'll have you arrested." "Will you? Because that would require calling the police, and I don't think you want Detective Harris asking too many questions about your recent activities." I picked up a manila folder from the table beside me. "Especially not when he sees what's in here." "What's in there?" "Everything, Lila. Every lie, every deception, every moment of betrayal, documented in excruciating detail." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "Let's start with the credit card fraud. Yes, fraud. Using our joint account to fund your affair without my knowledge or consent." I held up the statements, and the crowd outside pressed closer to the windows, straining to hear. "Then there's the identity theft. Using my personal information to book hotel rooms and rental cars for your romantic getaways. The tax implications alone could put you in federal prison." Lila's face went white. "That's not... I didn't..." "Oh, but you did. It's all here in black and white." I pulled out another document. "And let's not forget the company policy violations. Using corporate resources for personal business, falsifying travel reports, creating a hostile work environment through your inappropriate relationship with a subordinate." "Brandon's not my subordinate." "Actually, he is. As of last week, when your boss reviewed the organizational chart and realized that HR technically outranks sales in the corporate hierarchy, which means your relationship constitutes harassment under company policy." The sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside. I looked through the window and saw Brandon's replacement BMW. Apparently, his insurance had covered the damage to his original car, pulling up to the loading dock. "Ah, perfect timing. Our final guest has arrived." Brandon burst through the door like a man on fire, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "Lila, are you okay? I got your message. He stopped short when he saw the setup, the cameras, the crowd of people watching through the windows. What the hell is this? This, I said, is your intervention, both of you, a chance to come clean about what you've done and face the consequences like adults. Brandon looked around wildly, then focused on me with pure hatred. You're insane. This whole thing is insane. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like justice. Two people who thought they could lie and cheat and betray without consequences, finally being held accountable for their actions. I walked over to the control panel and pressed another button. The warehouse filled with sound, recorded conversations between Lila and Brandon, stolen from the bug I'd planted in her office, and the phone taps Frankie had helped me install. Brandon's voice echoed through the space. He's so fucking clueless. I can't believe he hasn't figured it out yet. Lila's voice followed. He's not clueless. He's just trusting. He believes what I tell him because he loves me. Brandon again. That's what makes this so easy. Guys like Eli, they never see it coming until it's too late. The crowd outside was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I could see people holding up their phones, recording everything. Stop it, Lila whispered. Please, just stop. But the recording continued, playing out their entire sordid affair in graphic detail. Their first kiss at the office Christmas party. Their first night together in a hotel room paid for with my credit card. Their plans to continue the relationship indefinitely, with me as the unwitting financial backer of their romance. Brandon made a move toward the control panel, but Frankie intercepted him easily, grabbing his arm and holding him in place. Let it play, Frankie said quietly. Everyone deserves to hear the truth. The recording reached its climax, a conversation from just 2 days ago, where Lila and Brandon discussed their options now that their affair had been exposed. Lila's voice. Maybe we should just come clean. Tell Eli everything and ask for a divorce. Brandon's voice. Are you crazy? He'll take you for everything you're worth. We need to make him look like the bad guy here. Claim harassment, stalking, maybe even domestic violence. Get a restraining order, make him the villain. Lila's voice. But what if he has evidence? Brandon's voice. What evidence? He's a fucking mechanic, not a private detective. We'll destroy whatever he has and make him look like a paranoid, abusive husband. Trust me, I've done this before. The recording ended, and the warehouse fell silent except for the hum of the electrical equipment. Outside, the crowd was buzzing with shocked whispers and angry murmurs. Lila was crying now, great heaving sobs that echoed off the concrete walls. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? I asked. Were you going to divorce me eventually? Or were you just planning to keep me around as your personal ATM while you played house with Brandon? I don't know. I was confused. I was unhappy. I made mistakes. You made choices, I corrected. Every lie was a choice. Every betrayal was a choice. Every time you looked me in the eye and pretended to love me while you were fucking another man, that was a choice. Brandon finally found his voice. You want to know the truth, Eli? Fine. Here's the truth. Your wife came to me. She threw herself at me because she was tired of being married to a boring, predictable loser who couldn't satisfy her emotionally or physically. She wanted a real man, not some blue-collar nobody who fixes air conditioners for a living. I smiled at him, and something in my expression made him take a step back. That's interesting, Brandon, because I have something to tell you about your hepatitis B diagnosis. His face went pale. What about it? It was fake. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. What do you mean, fake? Lila whispered. I turned to address the crowd outside as much as the two people in front of me. Brandon never had hepatitis B. The test results Dr. Morse showed him were fabricated. The medical scare, the panic, the emergency trip home from your romantic getaway, all of it was based on a lie. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible. I saw the results. The doctor said what I asked her to say. Dr. Morse is an old friend, and she was very interested to learn about your affair with my wife. Interested enough to help me teach you both a lesson about the consequences of betrayal. Lila stared at me in horror. You mean, we destroyed everything for nothing? My job, my reputation, our marriage? All of it was based on a lie? Not a lie, I said. A demonstration. You wanted to know what it felt like to be free, to live without consequences. I wanted to show you what it felt like to lose everything you cared about based on someone else's deception. Brandon lunged at me then, all pretense of civilized behavior finally stripped away. But I was ready for him. I'd been ready for weeks. I sidestepped his clumsy attack and let his momentum carry him into the concrete wall, where he crumpled to the ground with a satisfying thud. The difference between us, Brandon, I said, standing over him, is that my deception had a purpose. It was designed to reveal the truth about who you really are. Your deceptions were just selfish indulgence at other people's expense. I turned back to Lila, who was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. You wanted excitement, Lila. You wanted to feel alive. How do you feel now? She couldn't answer. She just stood there, shaking, as the full weight of what had happened settled over her like a shroud. Outside, I could hear car doors slamming as people began to leave. Their entertainment for the evening concluded, but the damage was done. By tomorrow morning, everyone in town would know the truth about Eli Granger and Brandon Harker. Their reputations were destroyed, their careers were over, and their great romance had been revealed as nothing more than a sordid affair built on lies and betrayal. I walked over to the loading dock and opened the door, gesturing for them to leave. Go, I said. Both of you. Go build your new life together. Go be free. Lila looked back at me one last time as she helped Brandon to his feet. What about you? What happens to you now? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. I get to start over. Clean slate, no baggage, no lies. I get to find out who I really am when I'm not being someone's fool. They stumbled out into the night, broken and humiliated, leaving me alone in the empty warehouse with Frankie and the echoes of their destroyed lives. Feel better? Frankie asked. I looked around at the scene of my victory, the speakers, the lights, the evidence of my carefully orchestrated revenge. Outside, rain had started to fall, washing the streets clean. I always wondered what I'd do if I caught her, I said. Turns out, I'd burn it all down and roast marshmallows on the ashes.